I would like to shift gear now to the Q&A. I see there's been a tremendous number of questions that have been posted on the chat group. I know some of the speakers have already answered those. If I can just get all the speakers to get their cameras back on again in case I direct a question to you. There were a lot of questions about the directors and officers, but perhaps before I get into that, Nick, I see there's a question that's come here for you, and it seems to relate to you know, this data that you've put together. Why is it that this hasn't been adopted at the highest level? You know, why do we appear to be continuing down the road that we started on in March? Has this been shared with the Crisis Council and government generally?
Yeah, we've been very open with everything. There are a couple of difficulties. So all of our perspectives have been shared. We were invited into Dr. Mkhize's modeling symposium, and that's available on the internet. You can see it. You can see all of our feedback in that session, which was on the 26th of May, a long time ago. And as I said in my talk, I mean, yeah, you must understand that at that time, when we were sitting there talking about 10,000 deaths, the recent number in everybody's memory was the 351,000 deaths that had been forecast by the first modeling exercise. So, you know, I think we were regarded as kind of a freak show. But, you know, as I said, we haven't changed our model once because we were just looking at the international information, and there's a huge difference in the perspectives. You know, we take the view like an epidemic's an impossible thing to build an actual causal structure of. It's such a complicated story, you know. Yes, there are these famous SERR models and everything, and they do tell a story, and it's kind of a textbook story, but it doesn't really relate to the real world. And you can see that those models have just uniformly failed, whichever country they've been tried in. And so we took this approach of rather saying, well, what does the data say? Let's see if there's some consistency that we can recognize from one country to the next. And what happened was Professor Michael Levitt, the Nobel laureate, who initially raised objections to Ferguson's model in the UK, came up with this phenomenal insight that there was a class of distributions that fitted these epidemic curves like hand in glove. And so we picked that up, verified everything he was saying. We fitted every single epidemic curve in the world. And there were one or two of the meaningfully sized countries that had slightly bad fits, but everything else was fine. And so we just started using that method, and it's not at all complicated. You don't need like miles and miles of code or anything like that. The question of why they haven't listened is very complicated. There's a political answer, which happy to get into, but maybe, you know, I'll leave it up to you to decide. And you know, and the short answer on that is, I don't think the NCC has had the health issues in mind for a long time. There's a political aspect, a technocratic, a bureaucratic kind of aspect to this thing, which is very disturbing. That's the short answer. On the modeler side, there's a hell of a lot of stuff going on. There's a kind of balkanization problem, as I refer to it, that people of a certain sort who have grown up learning those models, they have a totally different philosophy of science, as we've discovered. It's all data-driven, data, as opposed to hypothesis-driven, you know, where you put up an idea and then check if real-world data fails that idea. And if it fails, you toss it away and get another one, you know. And so that data-driven approach, they make the assumption that their model is going to work if only we had enough data. But that assumption is actually wrong. And that's actually an implicit hypothesis. And the implicit hypothesis has been failing for months, and they haven't noticed it. And we've been pointing it out, but it's just this gap between the one type of philosophy of science and the other. And I know that sounds very academic, but that is the truth of it. And then there's a certain chauvinism as well that comes, you know, none of us in PANDA are career epidemiologists. I mean, there are lots of really skilled data people from hedge fund environments, and interesting, what's in common is we used to using data where if you get it wrong, there's an economic cost, much like your underwriters and actuaries. You know, if you get it wrong, you lose money. And so we have that world, that mindset where we're not too worried about what theory we end up with, as long as it doesn't lose us money. So we don't live and die by whether we once said that this is the case or that is the case, and now we've changed our mind, So there's that perspective as well that's different. And I think, from the beginning, it is unbelievable. Like, our first paper was about the years of life lost to lockdown. It had nothing to do, the models were an incidental thing. But we came under immediate scathing attack from these people. Who are we to say anything? You're not epidemiologists. And just ignoring the fact that ultimately these are time series, and they could be describing like, number of strands of hair on a sheep. We can still analyze those. You don't have to be a vet to describe sheep hair curves. It's data, it's numbers. It's a real world setting. It's complicated. It's not just the disease. It's also the economics and the population and the virology. And it's just such a complex thing. And so our approach is not to sort of try and navigate all that complexity, and not to try and pretend that we can model every aspect of complexity, but rather to look at what you can say and what the recognizable reliabilities are, and rather to describe those and then take inferences from that. And that's why we came with a number, with no resources, no modeling, no 1,000-line codes of modeling or anything like that. Just some simple observations about what was going on in the world, asking ourselves lots and lots of questions, and sort of cycling through ways of looking at the problem. And we settled on that number, and it's still with us today. Those are all the many aspects, personal, psychological, and political, that we think explain things. And I'll be quick to add that exactly the same thing has gone on in every country in the world, just about. There are very few countries. Sweden was about the only one where there was no craziness like this. Japan, Taiwan, maybe as well, Belarus for different reasons. But, that this has actually happened everywhere. It's not a uniquely South African problem that this particular flavor of scientist is stuck in a very strange, very old-fashioned, actually, philosophy of science. And also it's a very narrow field. It seems they don't really interact a lot. That's what we detect anyways. It's quite clear that they're like oblivious to this question. They're quite affronted that we would even ask the question of whether lockdown has an economic consequence. And also when we suggest
a preconceived idea of what the solution should be, and ignoring the actual problem and some of the dynamics related to that.
Exactly, Simon. Yeah, ignoring failing to see it when their own hypotheses are being refuted, which is in science should not be a problem. You just move on to the next one. It's fine. That's acceptable. It's no shame. But I think there's another layer where it's just a broader social problem. This kind of cancel culture where if you make a mistake once, you're out, and it's so brutal and harmful. That what happens is they having said something once, they want to stick to it. And you see it left, right, and center in this. It's not just the modelers. It's almost all the scientists who are advising government. They're just reluctant to ever say, oh, shoot, I thought this in March, but now all sorts of other facts have emerged, and we see other countries. And so now I'm changing my mind. In our team, it's almost like it's built into the culture of our team that we try to change our minds every day, Alice in Wonderland style, and 10 times before breakfast. And so it also leads to a very rapid discovery process when you do that. You're learning all the time, and it's fun. People are really energized by waking up to a new concept of the world every day. And it doesn't mean that you're totally replacing what's gone before. It's just this incremental improvement, this evolutionary process that happens instead of like, boom, here's our model, and off we go to the races for the next year.
No, thank you. Thanks, Nick. And once again, a really great presentation. We've had a lot of people asking for copies of it. We will be publishing this seminar as a video, so our brokers can kind of go and watch it again. And of course, they can get hold of you on the Pandemic's website.
Yeah, I'm going to apologize. I'm going to apologize in advance for not sharing the presentation. I do so many of these things, and I often just like accidentally slip in an old slide or something like that. But everything I've said there is available on our website in a more up-to-date form. Maybe not in exactly that sequence, but if you go and look at the website, it's all there.
No, fantastic. Thank you.
Sure.
Simon, I've got a question here for you. Somebody's written in and said, you've kind of got this, you spoke about this advantage really of being the last man standing. You know, more opportunities because I guess some of the competition would have disappeared. But I mean, how important is access to finance going to be? You know, what are the roles that the financial services sector needs to play in kind of helping businesses with acquisition or new startups, people that are seeing opportunities?
Well, I think that, you know, if someone is imaginative enough, they will finding finance is probably the least difficult thing of the lot. You know, people always they like to put obstacles in the way, and my experience is that if you are a startup or you have a new idea or you're wanting to do an acquisition, or whether it's capital expenditure, you will find a way. That's actually the least of the problems. You know, that's why you're in business, to navigate around those obstacles. And I think that if you have a compelling plan and it's well presented, there are not going to be a lot of people that the banks can lend money to. Once again, there are fewer people, so their focus will be on people that have got a good track record, that have maybe run businesses responsibly in the past. So I don't think that that is going to be, certainly in our case, I don't think that that's going to be the problem. It's the businesses that maybe haven't run conservatively that are going to face problems, or maybe have a harebrained idea.
Mm-hmm. No, thanks. Thank you, Simon. Tebo, are you on the line with us?
Hey, Simon, I'm here.
Hi. Tebo, great presentation. Thank you. One of the questions that have come out of your presentation was, you know, you spoke about how the market is dealing with, or certainly the financial lines market is dealing with COVID and directors and officers, with some putting on exclusions and others employing, let's say, different risk assessment tools. What is SHA's position? That was one of the questions on the Q&A.
Thank you. So the current position at SHA is to not apply a COVID exclusion on our D&O portfolio. We do believe that we are able to effectively risk select which accounts we'd like to participate on, given their exposure, as well as adequately underwrite for the exposure that relates to COVID through the use of additional questions. Whilst treaty renewals are coming up as at 1 January, that may potentially change our stance. However, as at the current point in time, we aren't applying any COVID exclusion at all. I think it is worthwhile to say that we are seeing a lot that unfolds as the days go by with regards to the pandemic. Presently, we have justified our reasons to opt to not impose an exclusion. So we don't anticipate material changes, but it is a moving target.
Okay, no, thank you. Thanks, Tebo. Gareth, I've got a question for you here. Are you with us?
I'm here.
I see your camera's just disappeared. Okay, I'll go ahead and ask the question, and Llewellyn can obviously bring you up. We started off proudly sort of announcing the launch of a Western Cape office, and Philip alluded to the reasons for that. Could you give a little more insight? Obviously, the history behind having one, then not having one, and then having it again.
Sure. I think our decision to launch again and to build something there was really based on a couple of factors. One, we already have quite an extensive market share from Cape Town brokers, in particular in the specialist lines area, financial and liability. And I think we see the region as being a growth mode within South Africa, particularly for specialist business. I think the Western Cape is attracting high-tech businesses, attracting certain new kinds of industry types that will need the kind of products that we underwrite. So we want to be part of that growth and positioned, and we think we need to be on the ground there. We need to have, we need to have our souls firmly on the ground in that area to be able to connect with our brokers. Even though we're able to competently transact digitally, I think it's still about relationships, our game. So that's the one area. I think some of our existing products, motor, A&H, we think we are underrepresented in that market. There are opportunities in the local market with brokers there. And I think if we put, boots on the ground, we see some potential market share gains there for some of those products. And then I think long-term, Western Cape is, again, attracting human capital talent. People want to live in the Cape. I live here in Johannesburg. I love going to the Cape, although I still think my home's here, but we see it as an attraction point for young and exciting talent, human capital talent. And I think if we want to be able to get those skills into SHA, it may be a good place for us to be positioned to grow and attract that kind of talent. So yeah, I think, and as I said, we're wanting to not, in the past, I think our previous experience there was well before my time, was really just a very high level marketing relationship. We call it the tea and buns sort of marketing resource. Our goal here is over time to build up a fully empowered and authorized underwriting capability in the region, so that we can do the business in the region without having to refer back to the center. Although today's business models have changed, people can run businesses and have people sitting in Tokyo, Dubai, Chicago, wherever, doing the business here in South Africa. So, it's not, you can run your business like that now. But I think, people on the ground in the region is what we want to achieve.
Thanks, Gareth. I have another question here, and it initially started off as related to directors and officers, but I see a few people have expanded it into other areas of business. We've had this significant, I've even heard the word exponential increase in premiums on some of the specialist casualty lines. And one of the questions on the chat here is, we don't seem to have had the claims today or in this past year, and yet the premiums are kind of rising on this very steep curve. What do you say to that?
So I think globally, and we can see from the news and the feedback that's coming out of the big markets, the US and Europe and other places, there is a definite steep increase in liability claims, from D&O to all sorts of other liability, professional indemnity. There's been a marked increase in the actual settlements and the cases. That's been driven by two big factors. One, they call it social inflation, but essentially the judiciaries around the world, and I think it was led out of the US, but and in Europe, but it's actually finding its way here into South Africa. We're seeing that the judiciaries are making judgments and are awarding damages to third parties. And they're awarding bigger and bigger damages. I think it's a situation of, the judiciary looking after the man in the street, the small person, and going against the deep pockets of corporates, and sending a message that, corporates have to take greater responsibility for what they do out there in the world, in the communities. And so claims and damages are increasing at an exponential rate. There's a second factor, and that's also real in our faces now, and we call it litigation funding. So there are attorneys and legal practitioners. Again, this has been around in the likes of United States for quite some time, but it's found its way into South Africa now, where attorneys are going and representing these class action suits. They're going on risk, and again they're driving a commercial opportunity here, and that is again tying insurers and our clients up in court in massive, long, complicated legal litigation scenarios. So even if you come out the other side of it innocent, you may spend 5 years in court getting to that point, and it is a significant cost just to prove your innocence. And so as a result, yeah, claims are going up, and it's because of its long tail nature. There's a catch up in terms of premiums. So premiums in these classes of business have been soft around the world for 10, 15 years. And now you're getting this big spike in claims that are coming through the system. And the insurers and reinsurers are playing catch up on these classes of business. So, you know, that's what's driving it. And then, of course, we look forward to, you know, the impact of, say, COVID-19. Of course, that will only drive claims into the future. But right now, we're playing catch up on claims that have already been in the system for years.
Thanks, Gareth. Look, there are a lot of questions here. I think if the speakers want to carry on answering these whilst Larry is completing his performance, please go ahead. Thanks, Gareth, Simon, Nick, Tebo. Appreciate your talks today. Very engaging. And yeah, look forward to putting something together with all of you again in the not too distant future.